go from standard form to vertex form. All right, so we're going to start with what we have right there, y is equal to negative 2x squared minus 4x minus 5. We know what we're going to shoot towards. We know what we want to end up with. We want to end up with what we started with there, negative 2 times x plus 1 squared minus 3. But how do we get there? Well, we get there by doing something called completing the square. And completing the square involves a couple of things. One is that in order to get this x plus 1 squared term here, we first have to get a trinomial. We have to come up with a trinomial that allows us to factor in a special way so that I get x plus or x minus something parentheses squared. So we have to come up with this sort of magic trinomial right here. And once we get that magic trinomial, then it becomes factorable in a special way to get this x plus or x minus some number squared. All right, so that's the goal, and there's a couple of steps to it. The first step to it is to take your first two terms, and you want to make sure to factor out the a. So we're going to do that first. Negative 2, we're going to factor out the a out of the first two terms. So this is x squared, and then this is going to be plus 2x. So we factor out the a out of the first two terms. There's no reason to factor it out of the third term, because as you can see, at our final answer, we're going to have some number left over, so we don't need to mess around with that number. We can just sort of leave that. But first, I'm going to put the parentheses. I'm going to leave a little space and put the parentheses here. And the reason why I'm going to do that is because I need to figure out what number goes here so that I can come up with my magic trinomial. All right, so now I'm ready to come back to our completing the square steps. And let's talk about the first step here. So step number 1 is going to be to factor a out of the first two terms. Okay, that's our first step. Factor a out of the first two terms. So you can see that is what we did. A is negative 2, and we factored it out of the first two terms. Okay, that's step 1. All right, step 2 is going to be to try to come up with our special trinomial. And so in fact, I'll go ahead and write that in. Step 2 is to come up, come on, work with me here. There we go. Come up with, let's see if I can work on that C there. Come up with our special trinomial. Okay, that's step 2. I'll put special in quotes there. Come up with our special trinomial. All right, and that's what we're going to try to do next. And now the key to doing this is that we have to figure out what this value right here, this little plus c, that third term. That third term, c, is always going to be half of the middle term there squared. So there's a rule to it, and that is c is always going to equal b over 2 squared. All right, so if the a, and now I'm using c in the context of this parentheses, so a in this case is 1, b is 2, and we're trying to figure out c. C is always going to be half of the middle term squared. So if I take half of the middle term, half of 2 is 1, and I squared, it's going to be 1. So I know that my special third term to come up with my special trinomial, my additional third term to come up with my special trinomial is going to be 1. And I know that because that's half of the middle term coefficient, half of it is squared. All right, so over here, I'm going to say come up with our special trinomial. That means we need to find third term in parentheses. And we have a little equation for that. It's c is equal to b over 2 squared. Okay, there's a reason why it's that, but we're not going to get into that right now. but there's a reason why we take half of that middle term and square it. All right, well, you know what? I actually should move this farther to the right. See if I can move that slightly to the right. There we go. Because I got a bit of a problem here. And the problem is that I just changed my equation. And you're really not allowed to change equations because once you change equations, they're not going to be the same because you changed them, right? So the whole idea behind the equation is that means the left is equal to the right. And so y is equal to this. Now, if I change the right-hand side and I don't change the left-hand side, then I got a problem because now the left is no longer equal to the right. So I just added something to this side of the equation. So y would no longer be equal to this. If y were equal to the first one, y would not be equal to the second one because I changed it. So what I need to do next is undo the change. So that's step 3, is undo the change. Okay, so how do I undo the change? Well, a lot of times in algebra, what we do is whatever we do to the right side, we do to the left. So if I added something to the right side, I add it to the left. That's one way to undo the change. Another way to undo the change, though, is to simply do the opposite of what I did. So if I added something to this side, I could subtract it again to this side. And you know what? I think I'm just going to get rid of this term now because it's in my way. So, so what I did is I added something to this side. And if I asked you, what did I add to this side? You might be tempted to say, I added 1, because it looks a little bit like I added 1 to this side. But I didn't actually add 1 to this side. I added 1 to the parentheses. What I added to this side is going to be whatever it'll be when I multiply it all out. So this -2 actually would distribute to all 3 parts. So what I really did is I didn't add 1 to this side. I actually subtracted 2 to this side because -2 times 1 is -2. So by the time I multiply it all out, you would find that I did change it, but the way I changed it, this side over here, is I actually subtracted 2 to the right-hand side. So now I have to undo that change. So if I subtracted 2, I have to add 2 again to undo it. So now if I multiplied this out, I should find that I end up with this top one again. -2x squared, there you go. Positive, -4x, there you go. -2, that's a problem. But then I have -5 plus 2, and then -2 and the +2 cancel out. I just have the -5, which then I end up back up the top again. So to make sure that I didn't change it from the first step, I need to make sure that I undo whatever I did. Okay, so 3 is undo the change. All right, now it's an issue of factoring. So I'm going to do the factoring. Okay, let's see if my pen will cooperate. Okay, so now I'm going to do the factoring. And I get -2 times, I need something x minus or x plus something. And then over here I got -5 plus 2, so I get -3. And so the question is, what goes here? And the answer to that is, it's going to be x plus 1 squared. Now, how did I factor this trinomial and get to here? Well, the answer is you can use the exact same factoring techniques that we've taught you. So any factoring technique of a trinomial will work. But because this is a special situation, and we've kind of engineered this so that we have a special trinomial, so that it factors in a special way, there's actually sort of a rule to it. And that makes it a lot easier to follow the rule as opposed to having to use like the X factor thing, or the magic X or special X or whatever you want to call that X thing. All right, so 4 is factor this, I don't know, let's see, yes, blue is my color. Factor the special trinomial. And there is a rule for it. And the special trinomial will always look like this. It'll always have an x squared. There's not going to be an a here because we already factored it out. There's going to be a b. And then the c, we already said what it is. It's b over 2 squared. So this is going to be b over 2 squared. And so it's always going to factor like this. It's always going to have an x, because that's the square root of that. And then it's always going to be b over 2 squared. That's how it's always going to work. It's always going to be just b over 2. And if you multiply this out, you'll always get that. In fact, that's why we chose b over 2 squared, is because we know that once we multiply it out, the middle terms come out to be b, because b over 2 is b over 2 is b. Anyway, so that's kind of the rule. You basically just take b divided by 2, and that's what goes here. So let me just kind of point that out, is that we take that one, and we just divide it by 2. So it's just b over 2. And that's how we get that one there. And then you just have to follow the sign. If this is positive, that's positive. This is negative, that's negative. Okay. All right, and that's it. And now it's in vertex form. What's interesting about this, though, is if we look at it, to get from vertex form to standard form, we took a whole lot more steps in terms of like the algebraic steps. But to get from standard form to vertex form, we took a lot less steps, but it's actually a lot more challenging because of, I guess, it's not as straightforward what we're doing, or it doesn't appear to be as straightforward. So that's it. So here's your steps, 1, 2, 3, 4, on how you complete the square. And completing the square is the key to getting from standard form to vertex form. So now you should be able to get between all the different forms, and you should be able to graph a parabola in each one of those 3 forms as well. All right, so go ahead and write a summary over what you learned today. Thanks for listening. Thanks for learning.